I am a gay rights activist, and I'm passionate about that particular rights.
So, hello and welcome to the Free Press Journal interviews, where we interview newsmakers that have dominated headlines in the past week. Today, our guest is the erudite senior advocate of the Senior Supreme Court, Saurabh Kirpal. Saurabh has fought many landmark cases representing media freedom, the Article 377, and also the legal sanctity of the same sex marriage. A self described accidental activist, he is also a trustee of the NAS Foundation Trust, the NGO that first fought for the decriminalization of homosexuality in India. He has also been recommended for the judgeship of the High Court recently by the Supreme Court Collegium, and that would obviously make him one of the actually only India's first gay judge. He was first recommended for this judgeship in 2017, and we are here in 2023, and Saurabh is still not a judge. That is a issue separate, which I think we will have a separate day to discuss with Saurabh. But today, he's been a prolific writer, and his latest book is about 15 judgments which have shaped the financial landscape of the country. When I look up and talk about, and people say that, this is going to be India's first gay judge, this is Saurabh Kirpal. If I have to ask Saurabh Kirpal, who is Saurabh Kirpal as a person? What is he? What would you say to that?
I am a law. Well, you see, this
As a
unitary
person, as a
concept,
human being, what are you?
that's what I'm saying. There is no unitary conception of a person. And I think we are many things at any point of time, a lot of which are also contradictory. I am a lawyer. I am a partner to a man I've been living with for 20 years. I am a son. I'm an author. I am the father of two adorable dogs. I am a gay rights activist, and I'm passionate about that particular rights. I also believe I try to be a human being who has empathy to people who are unlike me. So it's not just a question of believing in rights for the queer community. I believe in rights for everybody, and so that's who I am. Don't ever. I can't put myself in a box. I don't want to put myself in a box. And indeed, I don't think anyone ever possibly can. I'm also not who I was 20 years ago. I'm certainly not what I was 40 years ago. I don't know who I will be in 10, 15, 20 years ago. This idea that your personality, your ideas, your desires, hopes, ambitions, character is set at any one point of time is, I think, makes for a very boring person. And above all, I hope not to be boring.
You've been a physics student, right? And how did you get to law?
Ah, Well, physics was my first love, without doubt. And had I been living in some country other than India, I might well have contributed a great loss to India's legal system by not becoming a lawyer. I say that in jest. Uh, uh, but, frankly, if I wanted to, and I wanted to live in India, there's no question of it. This is my home. I see no reason to leave it. I love my country. So, but the point is that if you wanted to be a lawyer, a physicist in India, you couldn't be. You could get into academics, and there was not scope for research, and it still doesn't exist, sadly. And I'm talking of the late 80s when I went to university. There was certainly nothing then. There are more opportunities now. So really, it was a question of the absence of opportunity in the sciences. So I fell back on the default option, which was law. I come from a legal family, a family which therefore uh, endows upon me a considerable amount of privilege. So yes, I took that uh, good fortune I had, and ran with it. I recognize not everyone has it. I had it. I ran with it.
What's the inspiration behind the book 15 Judgments which have shaped the financial landscape of the country?
It's banal, but actually, it's a very apt question to any author as to what motivates them. And I'm sure many people have many reasons as to why they write. For me, it is an endeavor of education of the Indian citizen. In my understanding and my belief and my interaction with people at large, uh, other than the source of information from being from WhatsApp University, the other source of information is often newspapers. But in matters relating to the law, that is also not very satisfactory. The media, which reports often is not by itself legally trained. So you don't have lawyers reporting in newspapers. I don't expect lawyers to be working for newspapers, and I don't expect newspapers to pay very high charges, which some lawyers command. So that's understandable. And also, on the other hand, you have judgments which are written in such an opaque language that no person can possibly hope to read a judgment and understand as to what it really says. And yet, I believe that if you have a faith in participatory democracy of our country, as I do, and you believe in the constitution of the country, as most of us do, I hope all of us, then you need an informed citizen. She must be aware of her rights. She must be aware of the legal history. She must be aware of the law. And that is a place where I found that there was a lack of legal education amongst the common public. And this book is my endeavor to help familiarize the reader about the salient features about how we have reached to the economic point we have today. Because the economy is like a journey. We don't suddenly turn up in 2023 with a particular set of economics without having had a prior history of how the economy developed. And in this development of the economy, I think one of the most underrated discussions that have happened has been the role of the court. We talk about the court as such a strong institution. Every day it makes headlines for A or B reason, whatever it may be. And yet, when it comes to matters of economics, we often tend to neglect the impact that the courts have had on the economy. The way the courts have had an impact on the environment, on corruption, on so many things, the economy is also one feature where the courts have had an impact. So it was my endeavor, really, to help familiarize a lay audience, a normal reader who's not well versed in the law, about the trajectory of India's financial history and India's legal history in matters of finance.
So there could be a lot more judgments. What made you choose these 15 of them? You think these are the most important ones, or are you were restricted with time and space, or how was it?
Well, I mean, I think it's always a qualitative judgment. My list of 15 judgments will not be someone else's list of 15 judgments. And time and space, well, if you ever go to a lawyer's office and you see shelves and shelves of books, all with judgments, obviously there's a constraint of space. You can't just write about every single judgment ever of any importance. Judges are also very prolix. They write terribly long judgments. So I had to choose some number, and that arbitrary number of 15 seemed kind of all right. So I chose 15 judgments. My intention was twofold. First was to pick judgments which had a macroeconomic impact on the economy as a whole. So not individual disputes which affect a family here or there, but would have the effect eventually on the entire economy, because that's what I was interested in seeing. And the second was to give the reader a sense of history and a sense of politics and a sense of where the court meets history and politics. I think it's important for your viewers to realize, and I'm sure they do, that a judgment is, of course, a legal act, but it is very embedded in the politics of the day, in the economics of the day, and in the particular viewpoints of the judges. So there was a historical and economic arc that I wanted to cover from 1950, when the economy was more, I say, laissez-faire. That was the view of the judges, to the 70s, when it became more and more socialist, then the liberalization of the 90s. And how did each eras have an impact on the judgments? So I chose different judgments for each of these eras to give the reader a sense of how judges also judge. So that's an important feature of this selection.
I looked at the Aadhaar case, and what struck me was that I would want your view as why privacy is not accorded that kind of importance in our country, in our times, as how the West looks at it. I mean, you studied in the West, you understand the society a little bit. And would you give us a perspective as to why that dichotomy exists?
Well, look, I think there is a difference between the law and society on this one. As far as the law is concerned, privacy is sacrosanct. The very reason the Aadhaar case came and the issue of privacy was raised was because the government at that point argued, just to give you a context, the petitioners argued that please do not have the Aadhaar scheme, Justice Puttaswamy, a retired judge. You cannot have the Aadhar card, Aadhar scheme, because when you have that Aadhar scheme, that enables the government to follow pretty much every part of your activity. So when you open a bank account, you go to ask for a telephone number. At that point of time, before the judgment came, you had to give your Aadhar card. I remember a time had come when Aadhar was going on in full steam, that when you went to the post office to go to a courier office, you had to start giving your Aadhar card. So the worry was that the government would then get a data bank of your life through the Aadhar scheme, and that would impinge on privacy, what is called electronic tethering of the individual to a giant database. And when this argument of privacy was raised before the court and this fear was propounded, the reaction of the government, as reaction of most governments, was that, I'm sorry, what are you talking about? There is, in fact, no right to privacy under our constitution. And they cited an earlier judgment of the 60s and the 50s of the Supreme Court, where, in fact, it had been so held that our constitution recognizes no right to privacy. Now, this was a very big surprise to the judges, I think, and to most people, because, 50s and 60s being what they were, that was 40, 50 years ago. The law had moved on, and we felt that we had a right to privacy. But nevertheless, a bench had to be constituted and heard the matter. And finally, by a unanimous verdict in Aadhar 1, ruled that there is indeed a right to privacy under the Constitution of India. And that right to privacy is based partly in Article 21 of the Constitution of India, which is a right which guarantees life and liberty. And the argument was that you have a right to dignity and autonomy, and that is why there is a right to privacy. So that is an absolute right that the court found. But you're right, as a society, we don't seem to value privacy. Now, that's for multiple reasons, and I think that is an answer probably more apt for a sociologist to give than a lawyer. But here I am sitting with you. Let me hazard a guess. I think it is that we as a society generally are not particularly worried about our rights. We seem to take them as a privilege given to us by the powers that be, by the politicians. We don't recognize the fact that the Constitution gives us these rights innately by virtue of being human and by virtue of being born in this country. No one has given them as dispensation of a manna, or here's take something from us, as politicians often will want you to believe. No, these constitutional rights are our fundamental rights. They constitute who we are as people and give us that right to live with the liberty and dignity so as to fulfill the four promises of the preamble of the Constitution: liberty, justice, equality, and fraternity. These are the four ideals of the Constitution.
No, I mean, a lot of my audience is from the younger generation, which has actually, access to the historical decisions and judgments, as you mentioned earlier in your introduction, as to why these judgments were important. And I think it's important for these audiences, and especially me as well, to understand the context where these decisions were taken and why they were taken. I would want to talk about this one, women in the workplace. I think we were talking about the Vishakha case in this. And I would want to understand, how would a Vishakha case, which was about sexual harassment at workplace, impact the economic situation of a country or policy of a country?
Now, I'm sorry to say this, but I do expect a cisgendered heterosexual man, which I presume you are, or whatever, at least a man, to ask me that question. I think a woman interviewer would probably be less curious about the fact, for the simple reason that Vishakha was a case about sexual harassment at the workplace, as you rightly said. 50% of our country is women. And if they find it impossible to work at the workplace because of sexual harassment, and you speak to any woman her experience of discrimination starts from the moment she enters a bus to go to her workplace, to the workplace per se, or even otherwise, if you're a domestic worker, you are constantly faced with harassment. Now, that means that you can't actually be fully engaged with the economy of the country. The labor workforce participation rates of women in India, is the third lowest in the world. Now, that's pretty shocking. Now, that is partly because of the harassment women face. And if 50% of your population are unable to work to their fullest potential Now, that is going to have a dramatic impact on your economy. But that's something that is just ignored because men often don't face it. So they wonder, like, what is Vishaka got to do with the economy? Well, 50% of your country is disempowered. 50% of your country is removed or not able to fully function within the economy. So obviously, it will have an impact on the economy. And secondly, another aspect of the same point would be that a lot of research and studies have shown that a place where there's a toxic work culture, where sexual harassment is rife, is a workplace where the companies do not do well. Companies perform economically inefficiently. So it's important, therefore, if you want economic efficiency and growth and productivity growth, then you need a workplace which is free from discrimination. So that's why Vishaka was an important judgment, which liberated a large number of women. The project is nowhere near complete. It's not as though women have it easy now. I mean, but it's at least it's important for us to be opening the door for discussion of how we can empower women so that they can work and contribute more fully to society. And of course, if they wish to contribute in other ways, a lot of women are homemakers, and that their contribution is not seen. But all of that must also be examined. So I just wanted to shine a light on this point.
Okay, before you go forward, I just wanted to tell you, no, I don't believe in any binaries of gender, and I don't actually come from a place where I think that I don't understand the privilege of being a man in the society and how it really is something which you consider about other genders and sexes of the society. So it was basically stemming from the fact that when we talk about the economies of the country and the historical context of it, so I couldn't probably relate it to the Vishaka case. So probably I might have been a little, I would say.
No, sorry, I was just also being a bit flippant. It just sounded nice for me to say that. Woman wouldn't ask me this question. Probably wouldn't, but she may well do. But it's an important question to ask, because that is, I hope your viewers will now go back and reflect on what I have said. And as I said, my aim here is to start the discussion. I'm not here to educate anyone fully. I mean, ultimately, these are smart, sensible people who are seeing this, such as yourself. But it's just to focus on this, and I know that's not where you were coming from. Please allow the rhetoric of a lawyer. No, I know that fully. Please allow the rhetoric of a lawyer some leeway. This is how we speak, and and the aim is not to undermine what you were saying. It's a very valid question, and this is not the first time I've been asked this particular question about why this chapter finds its way, and I myself had labored about it as to whether to include it, and then I came to the conclusion that it was an important one, but it's not. It's nuanced. You are right to ask me about nuance. Let's put it that way.
So for example, I mean, like, just I'm taking the discussion forward. So would you say that probably you included this and you were also thinking, as you said right now, deliberating it? Is it because of your sexuality you were able to get that nuance and write about it?
Well, I don't think it's a sexuality. As a gay man, I'm still,
if you were, say, for example, a cis-het man, you wouldn't have included it, is what I mean.
I think that's probably true. I think if you are a person of alternative sexuality, if you have ever been a person who has faced discrimination in some form or the other, either caste, class, religion, or some other form, then you do start viewing people's positions with a greater degree of empathy. You yourself have gone through certain things that makes you more attuned to language and acts of discrimination, which would otherwise pass you by. You cannot just ignore certain things, which you may not even notice if you have privilege. Privilege gives you power of being able to ride things over. Whereas if you're a woman, for instance, in the case of Vishaka, no, even the most privileged woman would probably face some kind of a harassment, and therefore would be attuned to the language and of harassment at the workplace. Something that you will take, not you, a man might take just so casually, so casually, would have a very different impact on a person who has gone through these things on a daily basis. So what harassment means to a woman and how that impacts her ability to work freely is something that comes, you're right, with my sexuality, which helps me. Now, I cannot for a moment say that understand what a woman goes through. That is entirely, I think you need to be a woman to fully understand that. But I think I can pick up some signals which other people may not. And this is again not to say that a cis het man from the upper caste who is ultra wealthy will not have empathy. They may be people. But as a generality, you are more likely to have empathy if you yourself have faced discrimination.
Yeah, so essentially, if you are sort of marginalized in some way, then you might just understand the entire how the communities are, in sense, facing criticism or any kind of marginalization in some form or the other.
Correct. I think that's absolutely right, Kashyap. I think there's a large number of communities in our country today who are facing marginalization, and I hope that gets remedied soon.
So, I mean, you've been in the headlines. I mean, you've been in the headlines for the longest time, and I mean, your book is one of the reasons. There are other reasons as well. So, one final question to you is: you said you love the law. You've been a gay rights activist. You think the fact that you read law has helped your activism, or that spurred your activism, or how did it come by?
Absolutely. I think I am an activist only because I'm a lawyer, because I find myself in a position where I can bring about change. I was not always, of course, an activist. In as much as when I first came and started practice, I was okay, not closeted, but I wasn't screaming from the rooftop that I was queer, and that was a journey for me. And I had told you earlier in your in this interview that I'm not the same person as I was 20 years ago. But somewhere along that, when I was more open and acutely aware as I was of the language of discrimination and the law, which was written into it in Section 377, I found myself in a position where I could do a case and bring about that legal change. And in that process, I started meeting a lot of people. And I heard stories of such deprivation. And, as I said, I come from privilege, I come from wealth, I come from class, caste, and of course, gender. The only thing which was slightly different was sexuality. So I then learned that a lot of what I had taken for granted was simply not true. And therefore, I felt compelled to try to bring about that change which I could. And in the Indian context, especially in the context of queerness in India, change is most likely to come about through the agency of the court. Parliament is almost certainly unlikely to intervene to bring about equal rights. The executive will not. But the one liberal agency under our state, under our constitution, is the courts, and they have been willing to bring about that change. And being a lawyer, if I wanted to bring about change, then it was a natural fit, really.
That was a very interesting insight, Saurabh. And I think the fact that people from your privilege, the fact that you speak about so passionately about gay rights, it's a lesson in learning. I think it's a very heartening to talk to you. And I hope that the recent developments which we're talking about, which unfortunately we could not speak about, but I think this all the best. I hope there would be justice in this country, and I think there is justice. And we hope to see you where we want to see you.
There is justice in the country, and there are justices in this country. Let's see how many we have. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you so very much for having me for this fascinating discussion. It was really enjoyable for me as well.
Thank you, Saurabh. Thank you.